Hello and welcome to Earth Star Observatory. I'm lilywalker, and today I'm here to talk about learning how to read the stars and the other symbols that manifest within the arising as a way of stepping into the dance with the beloved and his heart of gold band beneath the big top canopy of stars, as we lean into joy in our front row seats for the lions and roses and fireworks, oh my, that are our gift and blessing here in this precious human birth. Today, it is my hope to invite you over for a cup of wonder as we consider the question, how does astrology work? Now, you may notice that this is a bit of a different question than how do I learn to practice astrology for myself? But with regard to that second question, how do you learn to practice astrology? It's definitely a question that we will be getting on to, because by the end of this presentation, I shamelessly admit that it is my hope to have you fully engaged and enraptured by the idea of collecting this, your very own copy of this dataless index of topics that we're going to touch upon today that would allow you to be able to paint your own view of the embodied cosmos that surround you with your own heart in the very center on that throne seat of the light body as the wheels of the solar and lunar cycles move around on the astrological map. This is because it is truly my belief that this is your birthright. This is something that is meant for you to know and to practice yourself, not for other people to be doing it for you, like a preacher would do when they read the Bible for you or something like this. This is your birthright to claim for yourself. And there have been episodes in history where this material has intentionally been kept from you. And if you're interested in seeing like a real life example of that, you could look to the video that I did on Ivan the Terrible under the section of Elena of Moldova. And if you're into stories about royals, like that is like a particularly juicy one and is really good, but also illustrates a time in history when this material came up for review and it was voted against letting the people learn about it or disseminating it widely and making it part of the religion. And it's super fascinating because of that. But before we get on to winning back our birthright and putting it to good use, I think it's wise to consider not only how astrology works, but how do we use it on the path? What is its usefulness? Or as Terence McKenna would say, astrology and what is it good for? I think it's smart to consider that. And in thinking on that question myself, it occurred to me to wonder if synchronicity isn't the most simple and basic form of divination, and that it's natural, right? It's a natural form of divination that's very simple. And I think perhaps that this may be true. Synchronicity is a form of spontaneous or effortless divination without even trying. We receive confirmation or affirmation from the other side by way of symbols that sync in some way with our own internal process and are capable of providing meaning. Through synchronicity, we sense an opening that reminds us that the cosmos that surrounds us is not objective and inanimate, but rather alive and responsive. That we are not separate from the cosmos, but rather tucked into the nest of it like a mother bird. Whatever it is on the other side of synchronicity offers a morsel and inspires hope that she really is right there, present tense, like Eurydice, Orpheus's bride, faithful all the while and conspiring for our benefit. Now, I have this story about synchronicity that I'd like to share with you, and I think it works a lot like the examples that Carl Jung puts forward with the dream bird or the clock. But this example really happened to me, so it's a priori experience, and it's also super fantastic. So as the story goes, I was living in Austin, Texas at the time while I was going to the university there. And I was living in the Hyde Park neighborhood, and I was working at a local liberal church. And I was working for this minister who was absolutely brilliant. He was University of Chicago trained. He like was a fantastic writer. He was super smart, and he was a really fantastic person. But that being said, he was also a very staunch humanist. And this was a liberal church, but it was one that also leads towards like humanism, which is kind of a denying a greater power, or just focusing on what we know here and now and in the material. And so, like, you know, although he was like amused by my superstitious, like magical leanings in my philosophy, and he would like appreciated mentoring me. Like, he really liked hanging out with me and talking about like religious studies topics and philosophy, because I was a really good student and I was majoring in religious studies at the time. And so, but like, you know, whereas he entertained and found my views amusing, he nonetheless, like, his objective was to have me like abandon my more imaginal whims and come to reason as any sensible adult would do, and become a serious student and embrace more of a realistic or rational view as he had come to do. And basically, like, you know, Saturn's truth of the matter. But what he didn't know was at the time I actually also had some pretty strong friends on Team Imagination, not the least of which was a really strong Jupiter placement in Aries that I have that's very fierce and independent. And then also, you know, apparently a retinue of dakinis and elementables that were like capable of producing tangible effects that to enter into this argument. Because, you know, we had this weekly staff meeting like every week, and I was on staff there at the church, so I was part of this meeting. And, you know, every week this minister would share and enjoy at least a mystical leaning dad joke or three at my expense, because, you know, we kind of had this banter going back and forth. But so it's the night before this staff meeting, and I'm sitting down at an altar that I had constructed in my room out of an 8-track player and some speakers, and it had crystals on the top. And I would sit there and play tarot cards a lot. Like, it was like my meditation space. But that night I was in my room writing a poem about a dragonfly coming through my window. And it was like a love poem. And, you know, like I spent the whole night writing it or whatever, just like really in my own head. And then when I woke up the next morning, there was literally a full-formed, bright, blazing blue dragonfly, perfect, huge, on the rag rug in front of my altar, where like I would sit to read tarot cards or write this poem. And there's this perfect dragonfly. So needless to say, like at that particular staff meeting, it was a big win for Team Imagination and a big goose egg for Team Rational. But you know, this is such a strong story of synchronicity that like even I'm left wondering, like, if maybe my Pisces roommate, who was like had a Cancer moon in the 2nd house, and she's like super sweet and nurturing, if she didn't somehow like intuit what I was writing about, like in her mind, like she could hear that. And then she was like, I'm gonna go sneak in there and put a dragonfly. And that's like totally something she would do, but nonetheless is not like a denial of magic, because she does those sort of things because she's truly a fairy. And like, she kind of has that capacity to step into the fairy vibe really easily, which is also a form of magic, right? But even so, like, even if you were inclined to, you know, say, oh, that didn't really happen, it's still synchronicity, because like it was there when I woke up. But anyway, but even so, most of us have an experience, an a priori experience of synchronicity that we can point to. We know what it means and we've experienced it. Whether it be a song on the radio when we're like shopping in Goodwill or at the thrift store, and like it's like the song that comes on is like perfectly in sync with some element of our personal mythos that we've just been ruminating on. And it like shows up and reinforces that thought pattern of kind of getting into that mythical thinking about ourselves. And, you know, and it provides a meaningful affirmation, right? So like whether it's like something like that, or like where we saw the tribe of herd of buffalo come up at the Standing Rock protest. And there's just something undeniably magic about that, right? And so like, you know, a big thing like that. In both of these instances, we can see the concept of synchronicity, this notion of communication with the other side, taking simple and spontaneous form. And I think if we consider other forms of divination, such as animal totems and tea leaves and I Ching, tarot cards, astro dice, scrying, astrology charts, and other forms of divination that I've likely missed, that the mechanism we see at work in synchronicity, that window of opening, is also at work in these other forms when they're working productively or like actually prophetic and meaningful. And that's not always the case, because divination can be tricky. Like, it requires a sacred mindset, and it's in any form, it's not a party trick, it's a prayer. And so we don't always get accurate results, or we can get conflicting, like confusing results that send us in the wrong way if we're not approaching it with a sacred mindset. However, that being said, it doesn't mean that this prayerful divination cannot be extremely fun. Because as we see in something like the WTF Tarot Card Spread, like, this is super fun, but also prayerful. And, we may find ourselves in an instance where we're using a spread like this with our friend, like on Friday night, and our friend lays down the cards, and it's like a holy wow moment. Like, it's incredibly prophetic and meaningful, and you're both laughing because you're like, oh my gosh, WTF, how does that work, right? And we wonder, when we have prophetic tarot cards meanings, we do wonder how that's working. And like, if you practice tarot for yourself, you may know that like the same card will come up over and over, like throughout the course of a lesson or even a season. And like you're like, oh, well, I think that card's me. And then the next reading, there's like a swords on it or a wand, or like, and you see it move through the deck as you're moving through different phases of this lesson. And it's in moments like that where I personally am like, wow, like, how is this working? And like, I kind of spiral out in my mind, and I can kind of see the cinch of the wheels and the gears there working. And it seems to me like it's something about time and the slowing down of time, and like the way that like you're able to sit one wheel, the one we're on, like this rational real life wheel, is able to cinch up with something else, and like it catches the cinch and you can see through. Right? So the timing is just right, and it's just catching the sieve of symbols, something like this. But, I don't really know. So I think that it might be helpful to take a look at another form of divination. Okay. So I'd like to take a look at scrying. Okay. And I have to say that I'm not personally super great at using the pendulum, or haven't practiced it a whole lot. But I do know that there's this PDF online that's freely available, excuse me, called Letters to Robin. And apparently it's like the go-to classic resource for learning how to do this. So we're going to take a look at a couple pictures from it. Okay, so in the first picture here, we have a very simple map of how to do this, where we have set up a cardinal cross, and we've got, north, south, east, and west. And, just for fun, I'll show you, like, I do have a pretty pendulum that I made out of a bracelet my mom gave me, and this is some sort of Buddhist knife, a purba, I think it's called. And my friend Youngchen Lamo that I met, she gave this to my son Elijah, and I have appropriated it into a pendulum. So because it's so perfect for it, right? And she also gave us 2 trinkets that day, and I think she would approve. She's amazing. So basically we say, show me yes. And it's moving up at, north and south for me. And then I say, show me no. And I'm not doing this. Yes. Okay. Now, and I'm not going to ask it a question because this is not a sacred setting necessarily, but I would like to make it move with my mind in a circle, which I think I can do. So it's very curious, right, how this is working. And like, in the one sense, we know it's connected to my mind, but then again, so is the whole rising of the cosmos, right? So that's not necessarily a problem. It's just, is it the the tittering of the rational mind, like, you know, the tittering away of the mind, or is it some deeper, you know, connecting? And that's why there's like Letters to Robin that teaches you how to calibrate it and how to work with it and, you know, use it more skillfully. I personally am not basing my life decisions on that because I haven't used it enough. But what I find to be really interesting about this is now I'm going to share another picture. And so like in this picture, what I find is really interesting is that, you know, like we've added increased amounts of information or increased specificity in order to get like increasingly complex results, like increasingly complex details, increasingly complex results. Like we map out the form to be more complex. Or in this example, which is one that I created for this presentation, which is like a glorified scrying board. Now, and people, you know, we've added numbers and letters, and I copied this off of one they were selling on the internet. I just made my own because I thought, oh, well, that would be a fun project. But like, you know, you've got letters, numbers, and like days of the week and things like this on here. And so the idea is that increasingly complex details yield increasingly complex results. But when it comes to scrying, you know, like me not being a pendulum dowser, like I can't really verify this information based on, you know, these theories or things I'm talking about synchronicity based on scrying. But there is a similar form of divination that I can and do feel qualified to respond on, and that is astrology. Now, in my own practice of astrology, like as far as just the question of does increasingly complex details yield accurate, complex results, right? And the answer for me is yes. Because as I've gotten on to learning about perfection years and the solar return and that whole like package, Ptolemy's like predictive package of like primary directions and these sorts of things, like I find that to be, you know, spooky accurate. And it works, like for me it just works really, really well, and it's super complex, right? So yes, I do think that's working for me. But what I find most interesting here in this intersection between scrying and astrology is a similarity between the two of them that may not be all that obvious at first. And this like similarity really speaks to the question of how, you know, how is this working, or how does synchronicity and other forms of divination work? Okay, so, you know, now I'm going to show you like an astrological map. Okay, and so here we notice like there's a similarity between this glorified scrying board and the astrological chart, and it's not just because they're both my same artwork. Okay, that both of them are fundamentally both maps of the environment around us. Okay, and so then if we switch to this picture, you know, and I ask you that in this situation, where is the pendulum and what's on the playing board, right? And if we switch to look at this picture, we begin to get a little bit of a clue, like, how about now? You know the answer? Or how about now? Right? Like when we look at this, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that the metaphorical pendulum is you. And let's be honest, for most of us, at times, we do feel a bit like we are swinging back and forth or bobbing up and down as like the waves of samsara crash and beat against the boat that we're in, and, you know, efforting to go against the stream into the gone beyond, you know, whatever our best intentions are, we're nonetheless being battered by these waves of an illusory arising and of temporal time. Right? And the cycles of the moon and these sorts of things that are just, you know, creating this illusion of samsara. And we're feeling like we're swaying back and forth or bobbing up and down. And the effect of this is polarity, which is one of the laws of of the Hermetic laws, right? Like it's a fact of the reality is polarity. And that is what makes our spiritual bodies rectilinear. But as we know, we can learn to change that frequency. There are methods and tools that teach us how to coordinate the spheres and begin to gain control over the ochema, chariot, or light body vehicle. Without too much effort, we are able to learn how to put to practice methods for doing a lot more than teeter-tottering or swaying back and forth awkwardly in this cosmic dance with the beloved. And we may notice that with the Merkaba, or the six-pointed star of David, as the pendulum around us, as seen in these graphics, that when it starts to spin, it turns like a wheel within a wheel and is spherical rather than rectilinear. It's an energy that spins and curls and whirls like a dervish or a ballerina carried to the heights of peak experience. But with regards to the question of how astrology and other forms of divination work, I think it's fair to say that oftentimes when we set the table for whatever it is that's behind synchronicity to come through, using even the most simplest methods that we've considered today, that oftentimes the cosmos does seem to be responsive to coming through and letting itself be seen. In fact, it seems rather keen to play. But when it does so, it's not that whatever is on the other side of synchronicity is doing anything more than what it is at all times constantly doing anyway. It's just that for a moment, we've created the conditions for a synchronistic opening that allows us to catch up to it, to cinch so that we can see it. In situations of divination, our mind sets the form through which to see and comprehend and construct meaning. And whatever it is on the other side of synchronicity shows through or allows itself to be seen via our methods. Not to start to sound like overly complex like Alice Bailey or Madame Blavatsky, but although it's true that science is profoundly helpful in helping us to set those forms and the rules of gameplay, it is also true that it is limited in its abilities in this situation because science is bound by the ring pass knot of Saturn and cannot move to the outer planetary waters that move beyond the gate of the physical and material realm. Meaning in this situation is not happening by way of our mind. It's happening by way of our imaginal sense and seeing into something that's happening on the other side of Saturn's ring pass knot, and recognizing in that correspondence or cinch between the two sides, meaning that communicates to us. And our imaginal sense is very Neptune in Pisces. It's where Mercury has his fall. It's watercolor details, and this is where some of the more technical arguments between astrologers with regards to fundamentally correct ways to practice astrology are actually maybe a little silly and taking the whole situation a little too seriously. This discussion reminds me a lot of the story that Rudolf Steiner tells in the New Isis myth about how science eventually needs to recognize its own limitations and return to its place of origin here at this gate between these two realms, like the transpersonal, imaginal realm and the very rational, ordered material universe that science is the king of, and that this is kind of the ring pass knot. And science can't get past this, because it can't test those things. See what I mean? Right? But like this, in this story that Rudolf Steiner tells, like he's talking about how ultimately, like how helpful science is in helping us to just come up with these forms and what we need to look to see it, the scrying thing, but how it's limited, and so it needs to turn back around and come back to this gate where its lover Isis is waiting, because Isis has been waiting for him there, that science all along, and in that science needs to come back to this embrace so they can reunify and work together as family and lovers. But that in the meantime, like science is off doing its own thing, and Isis, or the mysteries and the imaginal sense, is left just there waiting, because the truth of the matter is there's only one way to win the game, and that's to play together and to come back together and do the thing eventually that Saturn will come back and do. And so in the meantime, all that the mother goddess can do is wait. And so because she just has to wait for him to remember that he loves her and that he's going to come back. And in the meantime, you can't make someone love you if they don't, right? It's what Bonnie Raitt says, and I think it's very true. And so patience is the only method for the lovers as we wait for, the other team. If, as we divide into teams, which we do, the artists and this, it's like, this is why Terence McKenna partially teaches that we shouldn't approach the material industrial complex with fighting and directly like this, that we make art and things like this, make art not war, because really, like, we're waiting for it to dawn on them to remember that they agree with us, actually, like, and that, like, that's a whole, to integrate their whole being so that they're seeing both sides of the coin, right? And so I love that story about the new Isis myth, and I recommend it to everybody because it's a myth that Steiner wrote for the Aquarian age, and he has taken myths and put them into epochs of consciousness, and this one is one he wrote intentionally for the age of Aquarius, and I think it's a great one. And we're not quite there yet, maybe, but like, I think we have forerunners and definitely themes coming up that are propelling us in that way. We've had the first Airy Trigon, and I think it's super helpful. And if you're also interested in epochs of consciousness, I do have a video on the progression of soul purpose and consciousness where I went through Rudolf Steiner's thinking of that, and I have that available there on the channel. It's slightly cringe, but the information presented in it is stellar. So in the next episode, we're going to offer a more detailed view of the cosmological game board via an illustrated discussion of the geocentric rings and zodiacal man on the one side, and of the five light elementals and subterranean realms on the other side, and the basic rules of gameplay and an embodied practice of astrology. Our first port stop in this voyage that I've embarked upon, kind of teaching the basic elements of esoteric astrology, will be the two pillars of Solomon and the two windows in the heart, where we begin to get a sense for how the motor of this vehicle that we have been blessed with in this precious human birth turns over and starts to hum, like how we get our dance moves back. So from there, we're going to be, and once we kind of get on to that, and I feel like everybody understands the playing board and what we're doing here and how to drive their bumper car, then we'll get into talking about astrology proper. And I'm going to begin those introduction lessons with a video on elements and how those elements combine to form the zodiac signs. So I love you guys. I hope everyone is having a great summer and that everyone is feeling, ready for this Venus retrograde and ready to do some work around self-confidence and self-love and the ways we show up and shine our heart and what the value of that is, and maybe rewriting some stories about that in order to allow for more shine of our heart and more fun and a greater sense of self-worth. Especially also by revisiting relationships, probably going to come up past, and rewriting those stories, but being careful not to fall into just doing the same story. It's more about your rewriting, so how you're telling that story to both yourself and others, so that you can bring in more of your confident shine to share with the world and more joy into your life, because this one's really about fun. It's not practical. This one is about fun. And so I hope that that everybody does some good work there, because I'd like to see everybody happier and having more fun, for sure. And in this time of the year, we're getting so close to the Lion's Gate, which I consider to be 15 degrees Leo. And I really call it that because it's fun, but it's really, in my understanding, based on the Wheel of the Year and the holidays like Beltane, May Day, well, those are the same, but, Samhain, Samhain, I think you call it. But this one's Lithia. And so if you want to learn more about the symbolism of that, like, I would definitely look to the natural magic and Wiccan kind of sources to learn more about that. That's not my specialty, but I do know about it, right? But then in my personal understanding, like that I've kind of cultivated of the Wheel of the Year, this is the time of the year when, after having climbed up to the height of the top of the chart and offered up our rose to the beloved, but to the summer queen, and having that, drop of insemination happen and the conception happen. So we're moving to fruit. That at this moment in the Wheel of the Year is where kind of we're knighted by the queen to move forward on our quest to face the dragon. And that doesn't happen till after the Libra equinox, and then into Scorpio season, right? When we're facing the dragon and really getting into our subconscious tendencies and kind of doing the shadow work, right? And, at this moment in Leo, though, we're being knighted for that. Like, we're being reminded that we're ready for that. Because the truth is that the way that the Wheel of the Year works, like what happens from summer solstice to winter solstice as we're going through these phases of facing the dragon, is really where we're pulling in the willpower to do that inner work. We're coming more and more, contracting further and further inward until we're like in our house and it's freezing cold, right, at winter solstice. And so like we're like contracting inwards to do that work and raising up our will to do that. And that work is what propels us forward in the next year. It absolutely corresponds. The work we do is what we receive. And so in the next year, because it's just like one of these things, which is a whirligig, right? And that's how they work. They go back and forth like that. The pull of one side produces the push of the other side. And so that's also how it works in the Wheel of the Year. So that's the point that we're at here today. Let's see if I can do you the whirligig. Can't get it going. Anyway, I can't get it going. But that's the point of the year that we are in here at this juncture. And so, may everyone have bright blessings at Lithia and enjoy the summer yield and feel confident and good about what it is that they've grown here this year. Okay? I love you guys. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
1, 2, 3, 4. Well, he's dead. Horses keep on killing me slowly, killing my soul and my mind and my peace. If I close my eyes, they run through my mind and they cut through the pines and trees. On these cold black nights, I see them where they hide, and I pretend that it's all fine as I drift off to sleep. 'Cause in my dreams I see how it's supposed to be, grazing with the tansy in the breeze. In that soft rolling current, our thoughts come so pertinent. We just wish it all stayed perfect, but the creek keeps rolling on, and all these dead horses keep on killing me slowly, killing my soul and my mind and my peace. If I close my eyes, they run through my mind and they cut through the pines and trees. On these hot summer days, remind me of the ways they would fade across the night, fade away. I thought of you today, how I give when I should take, and how I don't know what to say, except I hope I fly away with all them dead horses. They're killing me slowly, killing my soul and my dreams and my peace. If I close my eyes, they run through my mind and they cut through the pines and trees.